Oh hi, welcome back. So I was playing the 11.1 PTR and Feral Druid blew me away. Do you know why? No, it's not because of the new tier set, and no, it's not because of a cool new rework. It's just the damage. Oh my god, man, I don't gravitate towards specs that usually are top DPS, but it feels so good to do some of the highest damage I have seen by playing Feral. So, is Feral back? We often go into our videos and recommend people to not pick specs to play just because of the damage they deal, or rather, not overlook specs because they don't deal the highest amount of damage. The idea behind this is that most of the time, the performance of specs is fairly balanced for your average player, and the only time a spec really pulls ahead of others is when specific conditions are met, like a tank pulling around your main cooldown, or a raid boss being vulnerable just when your burst comes back and you just blast. As an example, this is just a simulation run with every spec and hero talent in Season 1 with 639 item level. There is, of course, a difference between the number 1 spec with the best hero talent and the worst spec with the worst hero talent. That's just how math works. You can't have everything be equal 100%. But I think I can say this for everyone. There have been specs that never really see the spotlight shone on them the way it does for something like Enhancement for the past few seasons or Augmentation Evoker, and Feral is definitely one of those. Feral hasn't been a bad spec so far, it just never really pushed through the ranks to shine more than the rest. There have been noticeable moments in previous races to World Firsts where guilds used Feral in Amir Drasil, for instance, due to its likely very good damage and uptime on bosses. Same now, since everyone likes to look at rankings and tier lists, I bet most of them don't actually mention the fact that Feral is better than the majority of DPS specs at dealing damage to bosses, better than Arcane Mage, better than all DK specs, better than all Warlock specs. If you don't progress raid, aka be in a guild that tries to kill bosses as difficult as possible, as fast as possible, you might not know how important boss damage is. Everyone has AoE damage. A lot of people have collateral AoE, or AoE that just happens regardless of their build. Unless it's a council fight with 4 constant bosses up all the time, chances are your AoE damage is at most fine for killing the boss, at worst useless. How many bosses have you been at where you wipe at less than 5% where that extra little boss damage would have gotten you the kill, and now you have to come back yet another night and fight the same boss again? I'm only saying this to point out that people who think Feral is a bad spec probably look at overall damage output and miss the point. Sure, overall is important, and guess what? In 11.1 you'll also have overall. God damn, finally. There must be a bug in the matrix for Feral to do competitive damage with the other specs, so let's see how long that lasts. Until then, note that in Season 2, Feral is eating good, and I never thought we would do a video promoting a spec for its damage. And videos like these are possible because we get the support of our Patreons. Specs like Feral are not very popular despite how beloved they are by players, and without the Patreons backing us up, it would be difficult to cover them in our videos since most people just want tier lists. If you like these style of videos and want to see more in the future, our Patreon platform is a good way to support your boys and make these videos possible. Patreon.com/Marcelian&Online is the link also in the description if you want to check it out, and thank you to all of you who are supporting our channel. Feral actually receives very few changes going into Season 2 outside the tier set and buffs that landed last week. Similarly, coming from Dragonflight, the spec hasn't changed almost at all. It would be nice to see a revamped talent tree with more cool builds and maybe a new spell or two. I mean, Shaman seems to be getting one every 6 months. But it actually doesn't matter because Feral gives you 3 main reasons to play it in Season 2 as an alt or as a main, and up to you in the end really. The first and most important one is the damage. Now, I'm not a main Feral player and haven't kept up with the theory crafting for a while, so I cannot tell you 100% why the damage is so high, but if I had to take a guess, it would be the tier set, since even before the buffs hit, Feral was still cranking hard numbers. The tier set is On its own, a boring addition to pretty much all specs in Season 2. However, for Feral, it buffs your damage quite significantly, I believe, since most of it revolves around finishers. So your 2 set gives all your spells and abilities a chance to activate the buff called Winning Streak, the theme of the tier sets for Melee DPS. This buff increases the damage of your finishers by 3% and it can stack all the way to 10, so 30% damage increase. Whenever you use your finishers, you have a 15% chance to remove your buff. It's a gamble style buff in theme with the nature of goblins. This is not something that likely you will care about unless it becomes relevant to snapshotting your bleeds with a decently high stack of it, Tiger's Fury and maybe Berserk. The kicker comes with the 4 set though, which as opposed to many other tier sets, it's completely removed from the 2 set bonus. When you consume Apex procs, you deal a chunk of damage to your main target and for 6 seconds you buff all your damage over time effects by 16%. You will of course have to play the Apex Predator talent, which you would play anyway since it's one of the only cool things you can do as a cat. But the downside it might have is that in raids, the proc chance will likely be way lower, or on one target at the very least. On another note, in big AoE fights, it will make Apex stronger and turn you into a real funnel damage dealer, one of the best types by the way. The best example for this would be the first boss of Dark Flame Cleft that constantly spawns ads that fixate players. Putting RIP on all of them will give you a large amount of Apex procs to sink in the boss or the card whenever it spawns. In big AoE scenarios, this will be even better. Feral having funnel damage is not new, since Apex has existed for a few good years, but this 4 set just makes it so much better. Again, I feel I need to say this to people. This is PTR, a test realm, something that is subject to change, and the nerf hammer swings and misses a lot of the time, but when it doesn't, it makes people sad. I don't think Feral needs nerfs, or is the best DPS spec in the game, or anything like that, but I do believe Feral will be significantly better next season from a pure damage dealing standpoint, and have to admit, I am curious to see how a Feral meta would look like. For that, we might need a few more buffs though. The second thing Feral brings to the table, which I believe a lot of people are sleeping on, is speed. Again, this is not something new, but it definitely will be important in Season 2, particularly in Mythic Plus. And when I say speed, I am referring to movement speed, the ability to reposition around your target, to chase your target if it is being moved, and most importantly, to dodge melee unfriendly mechanics. And boy, let me tell you, there has been a while since I have seen a more melee unfriendly season like this one. I think pretty much every dungeon has mechanics that force you to run away from your target one way or another. These style of mechanics are generally not very interesting or fun to play around, but it is what it is. The most egregious one of the bunch has to be Rookery. Thankfully, some of the big puddles you had to go around have been removed, but there is a specific section of the dungeon where the important mob you gotta kill creates these big zones of no-no puddles that you cannot stand in because they explode. And since the combat revolves around you snapshotting damage in your cooldowns and bursting more in your cooldowns because now your Tiger's Fury is stronger and you are weaker outside of it, it will feel very annoying to have to either not use cooldowns when this happens, which happens often enough, or waste them because you have to run away. This is but one example. Priory of the Sacred Flame has a lot of these mechanics in the first half of the dungeon, with puddles of consecration, traps, and other fires. You'll find yourself constantly moving around. Same with the second boss, which at this time of testing is a little bit nutty with the mechanics. Theater of Pain as well, with the reworked Necromancer boss. The new Floodgate dungeon as well has these shredder mobs that spawn saws and usually are pooled with other goblins that spawn fires under you and you have to run away from them. All in all, a lot of mechanics that will add up and generally create a more unfun season for Melee. That's why Feral will give a lot fewer fucks about this since the movement speed is so good. Being able to dodge everything, move into a favorable position quick, and keep DPSing feels incredible if you play other specs like Enhancement Shaman, for example. This is just pure good gameplay in the end, and you have to experience it for yourself to appreciate it. And lastly, the third reason Feral will be a blast to play in Season 2 is the sheer fact that you are a druid. First of all, there are some situations where Soothe feels pretty big if used correctly, and for that, druids will be good next season. But it also has a lot to do with your reworked class tree. Although I said Feral isn't reworked next season, the druid tree is different. The main benefit of this change is that now you have access to your druid utility kit without having to waste points or sacrifice other things you need. Innervate, Typhoon, Roar cooldown reduction, and more are just more easily obtainable this time around. On top of that, you are still a druid when it comes to probably the most annoying and dangerous routes in a while, in dungeons like Priory or Floodgate. You have routes that either deal massive damage to you while you are in them, or hold you in place to be pelted by AoE fire puddles. Neither a good situation, and in all cases it happens often enough where other classes will run out of their route breaks, which you have infinite of. And let's not forget that you have Mark of the Wild, one of the strongest party or raid buffs at the moment, which gives everyone 3% versatility, a buff that usually people really want to complete their setup. Nothing extraordinary is happening to Feral next season, which goes to show how little is needed to make a spec really fun. Giving it damage is the simplest out of all, and doing a boring tier set that doesn't force you into an unpopular playstyle is also a good factor. It seems like the stars just align well for Feral next season, which is looking better than Season 1 already. And if you haven't kept up with the changes, we have a video going over the most recent announcement for Season 2 in terms of Mythic Plus. Click it and see for yourself if it's better. Spoiler, it's better.